I am Mike Lyons, your host for another oral history interview for the Jacksonville Broadcasters Association. The association's purpose is to preserve the rich history and contributions of the area's radio, television, and broadcasting industry. The association is open to those past and present broadcasters and those affiliated with the region's broadcasting industry and entities who have served this region's proud broadcasting heritage. We welcome students who are focusing their careers on the broadcasting industry. Today, it is July of 2021, and our guest today is radio legend, longtime personality, broadcaster, radio DJ, Arthur Crofton.
Legend.
Legend, yes.
That's a nice setup. That's a nice setup.
Well, I mean, you're nigh on to, 50 years in the business, aren't you?
In fact, 50 years this year. My first studio journey began in the summer of 1971, actually over in the UK, for a small BBC local radio station.
And of course, you had the most distinctive accent in radio history in Jacksonville. Let's go back to your childhood in England. Tell me about where you grew up.
I was born in the industrial city of Sheffield, where they make the best cutlery, by the way, and it's steel town. And my father was a banker, so he moved around with the bank a bit. But I was born there, lived there till I was 6, then moved to the ancient historic city of York, lived there for 4 years, but then grew up in my teenage years in a small town on the Yorkshire coast overlooking the North Sea. So I grew up looking at oceans and so forth, and that gets into the radio thing. Because in the mid-60s, along come these entrepreneurs who put radio stations on ships and anchored them out in international waters. And they called them pirate stations. There was a movie you may have seen called Pirate Radio that was out maybe somewhere in the last 7 or 8 years. And they were broadcasting pop music on the radio around the clock because the only broadcasting in Britain at the time was the BBC, which was more like NPR. It was all proper and talk mostly.
Right.
So these entrepreneurs put these stations on ships, sold commercials and so forth. They were not technically illegal because they were in international waters. And there was one I could see from my bedroom window. And that got me completely hooked in the whole radio thing.
And you mentioned the 60s, the Beatles were king back in then, that particular time, and from the country, and you guys had to be proud as punch over those guys.
Yeah, they did well, but they were the sort of the leading light, but they were by no means it alone. They were just out of Liverpool. There were all these, the Mersey Beat, as it was called. All these groups came out of Liverpool, and we started hearing that music on the radio 24/7, and that was new. And that's why radio became very much a new part of the lives of, particularly kids, teenagers like me. So I got hooked into radio that way.
So you decided you wanted to be
I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that. And it horrified my mother. She was the education person. She was a teacher, and she had a master's degree and all of that. But she said, as long as you get a college education, I don't care what you do for a living.
So how did you end up in the United States?
Well, my mother was from Alabama. She was born in a little town outside Montgomery called Union Springs. All you Alabama people know where Union Springs is, right? It's on Highway 82, just southeast of Montgomery. And she was born there, grew up there. She went to the University of Alabama in the early 30s. A classmate of hers was this fellow from Arkansas called Paul Bryant.
Oh.
And so she studied there, then she went into teaching, and then she started working for the teacher retirement system for the state government in Montgomery. We're living with her widowed mother. And my father had joined the Royal Air Force at the beginning of World War II, 1939, for the UK. And they started training UK pilots in the United States because we were neutral. This is before Pearl Harbor. So he was sent over here to train, ended up at a place called Maxwell Air Force Base, in Montgomery, still there, huge facility. Right. The Air University's there, if I'm not mistaken. And they met at a social thing and fell in love. And then when he went off to do the war, as soon as the war in Europe was over, my mother was on a boat to England and never came home. But I had all this family connection in Alabama. So when I finished high school in England, I decided I wanted to study communications, which was not available at English universities. They're a bit too stuffy. You know.
High school in England, where'd you go?
In Bridlington, a little town on the Yorkshire coast. I went to a boys' prep school, and studied Latin and all that kind of stuff. Nothing to do with broadcasting or media, anything like that.
So you couldn't do communications in
Correct,
England. So
correct.
you came to
America.
America.
I'm a U.S. citizen by birth from her.
Right.
I am a dual national. I have 2 passports to this day.
Uh-huh.
My kids have inherited that, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
And so, and I got in. I came here specifically to get into communication. But my first place I lived, Mike, was New Jersey, northern Jersey. My uncle worked in Manhattan for the Corps of Engineers, and so I first arrived in the New York City area, and I decided, well, I'm going to go to school down south, but I've got some time to fill, so I went and found a job. I went to work for CBS News as a mail clerk way down in the basement of the building on West 57th Street. And my job was mail clerk for the newsroom. I used to take Walter Cronkite his mail every day.
Did you ever have a conversation with him?
Briefly, just more of how do you do. He was he was a pleasant man, but he was a big figure. You don't step in his
He
space.
was big time.
I did have fun conversation, several, with Douglas Edwards, if you remember him.
Oh, yeah.
And Roger Mudd.
Yeah.
These were the great broadcasters of the era.
Right.
And I got to hang out with them a little bit and talk to them a little bit in the short time I was there.
Right.
But that was kind of that was my initiation to living in America.
Right. So you go to the University of Alabama, and obviously your mother was from there, and I guess had a good communication school. I did
They
one
did.
with
They did.
Steve Smith, the former weatherman at Channel 12, and he's a Crimson Tide guy.
Charlie, if you remember John Cochran on NBC News,
Yes.
he was an Alabama grad from this broadcasting school.
Right.
They were very proud of him.
So they had a pretty good program.
Started in 1941, one of the oldest in the country, as a separate program, not part of journalism. It was actually a separate broadcast department.
And you did undergrad work and grad work there. Okay, what was that like in Alabama, you with this English accent in the middle of Alabama?
It was novel. I don't know whether you've been to Tuscaloosa, but the university, even by the time I was there, which is, I went there 50 years ago this year.
Well,
It was still a fairly eclectic place by then. There were people from all over the world going to school there. And so it wasn't as parochial as you might think. And Tuscaloosa and the university were a very diverse town. But I mean, it wasn't Berkeley, it wasn't Boston University or NYU, but it certainly had a cross section of people.
and so you finished Alabama, and your first job in radio was where?
My first paying job in radio was WNPT Northport, Alabama, which was just north of Tuscaloosa, right across the Warrior River. And I started off working Sunday mornings running the preacher tapes. Because, Sunday mornings, the preachers would buy 30-minute blocks of time. And my job was to go in and make sure the tapes were all lined up and run them. And then played a few records. And from there, I worked in radio in Tuscaloosa while I was in school. I also put the campus FM station on the air as the first station manager of that. And from there, I worked a little bit in Birmingham, which was a great break, a big radio station in Birmingham, Alabama. Made a larger market, top 50. And from there to Dallas to Tulsa, Tulsa to Jacksonville.
I understand in reading one of your interviews that you had a little work to do with the accent, trying to mix it with the Southern.
It was not conscious, but it inevitably happened. But the way I take that back. There were certain things that I worked on for instance, I'd say tomato, not tomato. And I would say, the trunk of the car, not the boot of the car. Those classic words that differentiate the two. But I've always said that I began to speak American English with a British accent, which is different because American English is not the same as British English. Its idiom, its way of expressing itself is different. But I just put some British accent on it.
Just so happens I visited some friends and they showed me a couple episodes of Law and Order in the UK.
Yeah, the Law and Order UK. Yeah.
And they just call things different
Yeah, they
than
do.
we do, don't
Well,
they?
the legal system is quite different. But yeah, I mean, it was said, it's been quoted by a number of people. I think Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw is the first one who said that the British and the Americans are two people divided by a common language. Which I thought was a great quote.
That's interesting. So you came here to Jacksonville when? When did you get here to Jacksonville?
February the 6th, 1978. I rolled into town on I-10 from Tulsa, stopped at Cassett Avenue and I-10. There was a Gulf gas station there on the right side. Found a payphone. You youngsters don't know what a payphone is, but ask your parents or grandparents. And called the radio station, which was on the west side of town on near Lane and Beaver Street. And went to the building and met the people who'd hired me to come to Jacksonville.
And then you were in Jacksonville. Your first job was where and how long?
It was the 600 AM frequency, which has gone through numerous call letters. At the time, it was WSNY Sunny 60. And it was owned by Ronceville Radio, a company that owned 96.9, which was then WAIV. And I was the AM station. It was a middle-of-the-road adult contemporary music station. And I did the midday show, 10 to 2. And actually I had some good numbers in that first and only book. But they decided they were going to reallocate resources to their FM, and so they got rid of me and several others.
And so that you were here in Jacksonville, your first job for how, not very long?
6 months.
6 months. And then you went to?
Back to Tulsa, where I'd come from, Tulsa, Oklahoma, because I had some family there. I had married and I had children and little ones, and we went back there where her parents were, and stayed there. But that was not a good fit. You know, sometimes Jacksonville was always a good fit for me. I love Jacksonville. Tulsa was a hard place for me to settle, and so after being back there about a year, I decided I've got to go back to Florida. For one thing, I grew up by the sea, and those of us who've grown up by the ocean will all attest, I can't live more than 50, maybe 75 miles away from the ocean.
So that was your big attraction to Jacksonville,
precisely.
Plenty of ocean.
I love Florida. That we have the longest coastline of all of the lower 48 states, and so I wanted to be here.
So you came here to Jacksonville again and
Came back in 1981, and I started mornings on WAIV, same station, ironically, though a different owner, and did mornings there. And other than a short tour away in 85 to 86, I've been on doing mornings here ever since.
Yeah. You left Jacksonville for another job.
I was hired away by a radio station in Washington, D.C. Wash FM was owned by a company called Metro Media, which was sold and got into another thing. But I was only there a short while, and then came back to Jacksonville and kind of picked up where I left off. Been here ever since.
And so you really, as you said, you wanted to come back here, and you came back here.
Love it here. Love it here.
And you're currently broadcasting on 96.1. Is that where you came back to?
No, I came back to 97 Wave. Was there and worked on WOKV when it went all talk. Did that a little bit. Same station group. But then they made some changes early in 1990 as the company that owns 96.1 to this day, Render Broadcasting of Pittsburgh, bought the 96.1 frequency and WEJZ, as its call letters were by then. And I was hired as soon as the owner bought the station. The moment it closed, I went to work to do the morning show, and I've been there ever since. That is 31 years ago.
That is really unusual.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable statement. Yeah, it is very unusual. 31 years, same station, same frequency, same call letters, same format, same owner. Pretty unusual.
Man, that is...
As anyone in broadcasting will tell you, chopping and changing is the only thing that never changes.
And what you're doing 31 years later at that station, the station you're with, is somewhat different than a lot of radio stations that are on the air now. Correct?
Yes. Well, the radio industry, as most industries, but particularly the radio industry, because I know a bit about that, has changed astronomically over the last 15 years. Technology is the main driver of that. I started in the days when we, played records. You slip cued the album, album on the turn, put the needle on, that kind of thing. That's how I began. Now everything is just click a mouse. It's all on the screen. It's all programmed in. It's all laid out in front of you.
Right.
And it's been that way now for a while, though the technology is more sophisticated now. The thing that's the phenomenon now that we didn't have is that now you can do a whole show from anywhere in the world and have it on a local station here in town. All you need is a studio and a really good internet link. So Wi-Fi and broadband and all of that. And the software that's available, the software we use is called Zeta, which is a proprietary. There are several others on the market. And it allows you to what they call voice track. So our midday show, I shouldn't be telling this, but You guys won't tell my owner, will you? Our midday show, the lady Jordan who does it actually lives in Pittsburgh, has never been to Jacksonville.
Well, but you're different in that, and this is not, it is still on many radio stations, but not as many as before. You're live in the studio when you do.
I am live and local. I am live and local, as they say.
Weather update is brought to you by SafeTouch Security, safetouch.com.
But I'll tell you, there are only 4 big companies. Deregulation meant consolidation. So iHeart here in Jacksonville has 6 or 7 stations. Used to be they could only have 2. Cox Media have, I think, 6. We have just 2. We're small. We're a family-owned company. Render Broadcasting of Pittsburgh, as I mentioned. And the stations, big groups like iHeart, just in the last year have laid off thousands and thousands of on-air talent at stations all over the country because they're now voice tracking from hubs in St. Louis and Atlanta and LA, New York, Chicago. So that means the local jobs are gone.
Yeah. You can't like that, being
No,
your background.
well, any field. I mean, not just ours. The idea that we can automate and eliminate positions is fine, but it's not the same as when you're live and something happens to connect to your audience that it needs to be done right away.
Nice, beautiful weekend for it. Boy, what lovely weather. I'm ready to go out and have some outdoor lunch for 3 or 4 hours. It's 9:41 right now, and Monday we'll be back together, Yvonne and I, and we'll have Steely Dan tickets to give away. They're coming to town here in October.
It's not there. Yeah. And so that's one of the big changes that has taken place.
You had to have a lot of mentors that helped you along the way. That when you started, I'm sure then you mentored other people, but
yeah, there were several people who helped me along the way, but perhaps the biggest mentor to me later in my career was a program director we had until 2017 named Chuck Beck. Chuck is now a consultant in the industry. He's from Silver, North Carolina, up in the mountains, up near Cashiers and up that way. If you know where Western Carolina University is, that's in Silver, North Carolina. Yeah. And Chuck had been in the industry for many, many years and had worked with some of the finest, highest level market programmers. And he brought, in that North Carolina mountain guy style, he brought an awful lot of things to me that were just so helpful and wonderful.
Mm-hmm. One thing I know that I read about, you have a clean show. You do that
That's
on
right.
purpose.
Yes, that's by structure, by design. I mean, I was up against, the Hoyle Dempseys of this world. I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to bring him into this project.
Yeah.
You should.
Yeah.
He's an interesting man, the nicest guy, very shy, but outrageous on the radio.
Oh yeah, he's very shy.
And of course, he was one of the old Greasemen team
yeah.
on the old WAPE.
I used to listen to them going to work at Channel 17 in the early days. Yeah,
on 690 AM, which is what WAPE used to be,
yeah.
as opposed to 95.1 as it is now. But we constructed a show that was adult-oriented and it was family-friendly. Because that's how we were more comfortable. I had children grow up here, and I didn't want my children not to be able to listen to my show. And my partner on the show now, and has been for the last 11 years, almost 12, Yvonne Velasquez, is a mother of 4, from 19 to 15. Yeah. And again, we're not sort of mamby-pamby, but we don't, there are certain things we just don't talk about. We don't go down that road. Right. Though we are very gifted, Mike, at euphemisms. Saying stuff that the grown-ups will get, and the kids will go right over their head.
I read one thing you talked about, that what you do is not an easy thing to do if people think it's an easy thing to do.
Well, if people think it's easy, we're doing our job. We want it to sound like we just sit around and have coffee and play songs and chat with you. Yeah. But no, it, like any profession, it's quite demanding. Getting up at 4 a.m. for the last 40 years has been quite something. I wake up 7 days a week. I wake up at 3:45.
Right. Saturday, Sunday morning.
Saturdays, holidays, whatever. I'm always awake, and the dog and the cat are always wanting me to get up and start moving around because they see me stop waking up. Yeah. So, but it isn't easy, but it's been a real blessing and a gift, and I'll always be appreciative for the fact that thousands of people tune in, and according to the latest ratings, we're doing very, very well. So that's why I'm still employed at my advanced years, the gray hair and all.
What's been your favorite thing about radio broadcasting?
That's a very good question because it covers so many things. I like the fact that radio, with deference to all of you in television, in this medium, in television, somebody once said, television stretches the imagination to 25 inches diagonally, or 55 now, or 70, whatever the screens are. Radio is the whole theater of the mind analogy, where the image that people have while they're listening, it depends on them constructing the image. Now, I've met many of you, but there are people, thousands and thousands of people who listen to us whom I've never met. They may not go to our website. It used to be they didn't even know what you looked like. Now, the web has changed all of that. Right. But I like the fact that we're there with someone in the car, we're there in their kitchen, even more personal places sometimes. And there's an intimacy about radio that doesn't really come across in other media. It's very personal. And that aspect of what we do, I really enjoy. Yeah.
How much have you heard from your listeners? How much over the years?
Well, it's changed dramatically. I remember I was still in school in the early 70s, so this is 73, at a radio station in Birmingham, 960 AM, that had a high 5,000 kilowatt transmitter, for you engineers watching, that had a directional antenna that beamed west from Birmingham. And I remember I worked nights on a Saturday night on the weekend while I was in school. And I remember I started getting letters in the mail from Texas, from Louisiana, people who were just scanning the AM band at night, seeing what they could hear, and they heard me, and I had a funny accent. And so they listened, and they got my name, and they looked up the station, and they wrote me notes. So that was the first communication with listeners other than the local phone call. Obviously, it used to be that the phone calls were the key, particularly for pop radio. Particularly in the evening, you know, they'd have the screaming teen jock on who'd put kids on the air and all this kind of business.
And take requests live.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah. That largely has gone now, but nowadays it's all social media. Nowadays it's all Facebook. Nowadays it's all Instagram. It's all Twitter. That's how we get feedback. And we give feedback. We post, you know, when we talk about something on the air, within a minute or two, it's on Facebook. That story and the source material we've used is on our Facebook page. So people can then react to it and respond to it.
And that's how that technology has affected all kind of broadcasting.
All media. I mean, if you look at television news now, you watch our local broadcasters here, same channels that have been around, you'll see that much of what they do involves their social media platform, to the point you see anchors of their morning shows sitting there with their cell phones in their hands, actually reading them and looking at them as they're on the air. Yeah. I mean, who would have thought of that 20 years ago? You know, that would have been horrific. Yeah. So,
I assume you met all kinds of people, well-known people in your day. Name some of them. I guess you probably interviewed some of them on the radio. Maybe that's a little different now too.
Yeah, we don't do any. Our station is music intensive, always was, but we have less talk elements than we did in the past. That's because we're up against not only other radio stations, but we're up against Spotify, we're up against Pandora. And so we have to keep the music playing, because people, if there's too much talk, if they come to us for music, which is what 96.1 has always done, if we're not playing plenty of music, they're going to go to their Pandora. They're going to turn on their their Apple feed or whatever their
I know I'm listening to you in the previous week or two before. I tend to be a sports talk radio guy, but music. I mean, man, it's unbelievable. I said, man, there's a song. Where's Arthur?
Yeah. We're there linking the songs together. There are times when we like to make the music very concentrated as part of the program structure. Between, say, we go commercial free at 7:30, which means that we go for an hour and a half almost without any commercials, just to get people embedded in so that they can enjoy the music, because that's what they want.
7:30 on Monday, of course, we'll kick off the workday commercial free as always, and at 9 o'clock on Monday, we'll give you Monday's first opportunity to get the keyword who could win you $1,000 in the Baker Glass and Mirror $1,000 workday. Now, of course, today, though...
But there's also, in between those songs, we're saying stuff and we're commentating.
Right, yeah.
But you'd ask me about people I'd met. I mean, going back, I just didn't mean to distract. I apologize.
My God,
I
distracted
tend to
you.
wander a little,
Yeah.
radio guy.
Yeah.
I met a number of people over the years. One I always remember. This was at Metro Park, rest in peace, Metro Park, when the Symphony had their Starry Nights concerts. John Denver. John Denver came, and I was introducing the shows. That's because we were the sponsoring radio station.
Right.
And I introduced him as we had a thunderstorm, an electric storm, a lightning storm, and a gully-washing rainstorm. And we had to call the people were out there in the rain, thousands, and we had to call the show because of the lightning. Lightning was the issue, not the rain.
Yeah.
And John Denver was standing there with me in the back there, and we just 12 strings strung over his shoulder, just waiting for this to go, and it didn't. So then he came. So he said, "I'll be back." I went out on stage and announced that it was cancelled. Here am I in a lightning storm holding a wired microphone touched to the ground there where there's flooding going underneath the stage. And it's like, I could be dead at any moment, but God willing, I wasn't. Yeah. And what was so interesting was he went out there and grabbed the microphone and said, "I will be back." And he did. And I introduced him a second time. And he, after the show was over, he said, "I'm hungry. You know a good Italian restaurant that's open?" And this is back when, 90s, I guess. I said, "Well, there's Angelo's on University Boulevard in Arlington." I knew that one. Yeah. And it was before the town center and all of that was built. And so we called over there. They were open. And so he went to Angelo's for dinner on University Boulevard after the show. He was dead within 3 weeks. It was right before one of the last shows he did before that ultralight plane that he was flying crashed in California. So it was very powerful. So that's a very strong meeting. Peter, Paul, and Mary were wonderful. I mean, all these wonderful performers who came, and that was the main vehicle. I remember when Bernadette Peters, from Broadway, was doing a show, and she had a trailer out back with her personal, dressing trailer. And we got a chance to go in and meet her, and she was in her outfit, which was a sort of a negligee kind of very, very sexy looking thing. And I remember she kissed my cheek. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, and as we were introduced, I didn't wash my face for like a week. So that was kind of fun. Yeah. So, and then there are other, I remember talking to, if you remember Bob Schieffer of CBS News, he was on a book tour when he published his book and was in the studio. That was more recently, I'd say recently, 10 years ago, something like that. And he, engaging, enchanting man, and talking about the television news business at that level. Right.
So the interesting people that you get to meet in radio had just been fascinating and wonderful, really,
yes,
for you.
Yes, it has. It's really terrific, and I'm being we've done live broadcasts from Walt Disney World many times, and getting to interview. They just passed away, both of them, but there was one man and one woman. They were man and wife, who were the only sanctioned voices of Mickey and Minnie in the entire Disney organization. And for the life of me, I can't remember their names right now. But I got to sit and spend some time with both of them. They were voice actors. Yeah. And they were just enchanting as they could be. But we had to swear to all the, because this is radio, not television. Right. So we had to make a deal with the Disney people that you never bring them out of character. You don't, so tell us what you really do, none of that. Right. They came as Mickey and Minnie. They were in character for the interview.
And they did that so well.
And they did it beautifully. They did it beautifully. And they have replaced them now. I can't remember the name of the people, but that was kind of cool meeting them down at Walt Disney World. Just one of the many people.
Your favorite music? You don't really get to program your music so much on the radio.
Never have.
Because I know you play all kind of different stuff.
Well, we play music from the 80s, 90s to today for adults. So it goes back to the great Tom Petty songs from the 80s, all the way through stuff today that Shawn Mendes and Justin Bieber and people like that. So
Katy Perry, I heard you play her the other day.
Katy Perry, we play a lot of Katy Perry and Maroon 5. Love Adam Levine.
Right.
My personal musical tastes are very, very eclectic. I love symphony music. I love the Jacksonville Symphony. I think they are phenomenal. We don't realize what a treasure they are. They go way beyond a city this size symphony level and have done for a number of years. Fabio Michetti, who was in Brazil, back in Brazil now where he's from, had an awful lot to do with building it. But the present conductor is just doing a music director is doing a brilliant job as well. Right. A fellow from Belfast, and I love that. But I also love techno. I love techno. I love trance music and all that. I was watching a video on YouTube played on my big speakers at home of a Enya song done trance style. Fabulous stuff. But I also love great music. I like great music in any genre at all. I mean, so it's very, very diverse.
What has it meant to you to work in the broadcasting industry so many years in Jacksonville, Florida?
Well, I came here by chance. I was working in Tulsa. The program director I was working for got a job here, and he came here. And he immediately, as soon as he confirmed his position, usually program directors bring their own people. Any management chain like to bring in their own people, particularly performers. And so he offered me this job to come and do middays here. And I came, never having been here before. I had a cousin who lived here, but I had never been here to see him or anything. And rolled in, and just, for some reason, something just clicked. And it's 1978. This is when Hans Tanzler was still mayor, running for governor.
Yep.
He ran for governor, I think, in '79. That's when Jake Godbold became mayor. I loved Jake. Knowing Jake Godbold, the late Jake Godbold, God rest him, what a great, great leader, and set the scene for us all. And so I just loved the place, and I was so warmly welcomed by Jacksonville. Jacksonville was wonderfully friendly to me. An interesting story I was told. I was doing a remote broadcast, an on-site broadcast, in front of what is now a CBS. It was an Eckerd in those days. And we were giving away stuff and doing live cut-ins from in front of the store over on Roosevelt Boulevard. And a young couple came up, and it turns out they were Navy people. He was enlisted, had just come, I think at that time, to Cecil Field, maybe NAS, I can't remember. But he was saying and we just, friendly and welcomed them. Welcome to Jacksonville. They just moved here, just been transferred here maybe a week ago before. And they said how welcoming and friendly Jacksonville is, particularly to our Navy people. He says, I didn't find that in Pensacola, and certainly not in Norfolk. He says, but Jacksonville just loves the Navy people. And we do, don't we? And so it's that warmth, that Jacksonville. And we have our issues, we have our problems, always have, but we kind of roll up our sleeves and try to get down, deal with it. And I've always felt that natural, organic sense of community in Jacksonville. And that's one of the reasons I love being part of it, as we've been on the air all these years.
Yeah, and the people loved you, and there's been a lot of change in the city that you've seen.
Oh, very much so.
Has that affected your radio broadcasting or
You just have to, the biggest challenge is staying relevant to an audience. Our audience is 25 to 54-year-old adults, mostly women. It's oriented to women. Right. Not excluding men, but our topics, we focus, because you have to do that in branding a radio station. You have to, who is your target audience? Go after them. And we've done that, and our target has been mostly adult women. And we, so in staying relevant to them, we need to know what's going on in the community. But what is really interesting is when I started 30 years ago, the people who were 20 when I started are now 50. And the people who were 40 are now 70. And so, you have to remember that and try and sort of, there's a new generation coming along, and I trying to remain relevant. That's the challenge. It's always been true, but it's particularly true today because things are changing so fast. I mean, do you know what goes on TikTok?
Not really, no, I don't.
Well, I have to know a bit about it. Fortunately, my colleague Yvonne, shout out to Yvonne Velasquez, by the way, wonderful, wonderful broadcaster, my partner in the morning show. She's been very good at opening up this old head of mine to things that are going on.
You mentioned her today. She started her broadcasting career in New York.
Yeah,
she's been around all over the place.
She is, and I use this word because she uses it. I'm not misappropriating it, I hope. She is a New Yorican. Her parents are both from the island of Puerto Rico, moved to Brooklyn, and she was born in Brooklyn, but grew up in her teenage years in New Jersey, in Monmouth, went to Monmouth University in New Jersey, and got into radio and early days of MTV in New York City. Was on the radio in New York, was on the radio in Los Angeles, and then decided, she had family in Palm Coast, and decided that coming to Florida seemed like a good idea because she had kids in tow. She has 4. Right. And so she came to the area, and we had an opening, rare, and she applied. She'd been out of work for a little while, and she joined us almost 12 years ago.
And there's a pair that wanted to come to Florida,
yes,
and Jacksonville specifically.
Yes, yes,
yes. What about, what would you say to young students that are considering going into broadcasting, want to be a radio broadcaster and do what you do? What would you say to them?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that because I've been in it so long, and I don't know. We're recording this here at UNF. I don't know what I in graduate school was a graduate instructor in radio and television production, but that was 1974, 5. The universe has changed.
Radio production now and radio production then was just
we can do so much more now with so much less in terms of human resources. The old joke is, what would I say to somebody who wanted to go into radio and do what I do? Don't. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be DJs.
Available at milb.com/Jacksonville.
But because it is a tough business. The job, we all began working like I was saying earlier about the little job I started running preacher tapes on a Sunday morning. Those jobs are all gone. It's now all completely computer driven and automated. They don't need people. So how do you get the entry level jobs where you learn the trade? Yeah. Very, very hard. One of the things it's very difficult to do in Jacksonville radio now. There aren't any, you can get some internships in promotions and in sales, very few, if any, in the on-air side of it, where they used to be. Right. And so you really have to go to a bigger, more media hub place. Orlando more so than here, Atlanta, St. Louis, Chicago, Denver, LA, New York, those kinds of hubs where there's a lot of media going on, as opposed to just being local. So there aren't a lot of job opportunities but there aren't that many jobs. I mean, the thing is, what computers have done is eliminated a lot of the local live people in the night hours, overnight and so forth. I mean, radio stations these days, they lock the door at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. There's nobody there. And it's true even with some television operations.
They keep broadcasting.
Well, they stay on the air because it's all automated. And our chief engineer has a very sophisticated cell phone, and he can control the transmitters, turning them up, down, left, right, whatever, and the computers that run the program. He can do it all from sitting on his deck at home on his phone. He can do all the stuff. Well, you had to be on site before, but not anymore.
31 years at the same station, same owner, same call letters and everything. What about retirement? You've been in it so long. What about retirement?
Well, as my late mother-in-law used to say, she'd say, now you will go to work at 6 and you get off at 10. So it's like 4 hours. When are you going to get a real job? I don't know. I will retire. I think the point will come when it is not in the station's interest to keep an old guy who's 70 years old sitting around.
But you've been quoted, I think, as saying that you'll go out in the box. I mean, you said that
well,
before.
Go out in a pine box. That's exactly right. And that's nice. I tell you, I'm richly blessed that I've been able to keep doing what I do. And I will give the people I work with, who are all younger than me, the credit for allowing me to sort of stay relevant without their input and without their interaction and without them scolding me on occasion. You old square, you old fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't still be there. But I've been able to continue this. And Mike, in the final analysis, the ratings stay strong. And that is what ultimately it's all about.
That's got to make you feel good.
It does. It's very gratifying. Mm-hmm. Very gratifying.
no regrets for coming to Jacksonville, Florida and broadcasting so long.
Absolutely not. I mean, you know, a lot of people I've known in the business have hopscotched the country from city to city to city, as so beautifully immortalized in the old Harry Chapin song, WOLD. I am the morning DJ at WOLD, playing all the hits for you wherever you may be. I loved Harry Chapin. Yeah. And, you know, people move around just gig after gig after gig. And you remain a wanderer. You throw everything in the back of your SUV and off you go. I didn't want to do that. So I found a place that actually wanted me to stay. And I'm blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah, I was in broadcasting in Jacksonville 39 years.
Yeah, and you're on your, I mean, there are an awful lot of your colleagues in television move.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, periodically you'll be on watching a national network and all of a sudden your face will show up and go, I remember he was at Channel 12.
Right.
Or she was on Channel 4.
Yeah.
So people do move. And, you know, one of the keys about being successful in this business, I think, you talked about earlier about young people going into it, be flexible. Be flexible. Go where you've got to go. Now, in my early days, I was moving around. In 1976, I worked in 3 different states. I worked in in Tuscaloosa, Dallas, and Tulsa. So Alabama, Texas, and Oklahoma, all within a space of 6 months. Because I was very young, I was a single, and I packed everything in my old Chevy Vega that I owned and could move around. But that wasn't how I wanted to live when I was 30. Right. And by then I ended up here.
Well, so many people in Jacksonville glad that you came here and you're still on the air, and I'm glad you sat down with me. That was fantastic.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Mike. And I miss seeing you on television. You know?
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while, but I still miss you. You see, I'm old enough to remember when Mike Lyons was all over the television news. And it was what was nice was that you had the local knowledge because you'd always been here.
Yeah. Yeah, when I grew up here. I've been here since I was 2, so, you know.
There you go.
there we go. Well, thanks for coming in today, Arthur.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you very much.